And welcome back to Free for All Friday on Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. Just closed the loop on President Obama's visit to Israel, his conversation about the Palestinians yesterday. We'll play one more soundbite and then go to the phones, 888-589-8840. If the Palestinians do not have a state in their own homeland, there is only one party to blame, and that's the Palestinians. It is their fault. It is the fault of the Muslims. It is the fault of the Arab nations that share that part of the world with Israel. Israel, since 1948, has eagerly accepted a two-state solution. Israel, since 1948, has been willing to live side by side with Palestinian, Muslim, Arab neighbors with sovereign borders respected between them. The Palestinians, the Muslims, never have. Not for a single day since 1948. Instead of accepting the two-state solution that the UN presented, Israel accepted it. That's why they've got a nation today. They took the UN up on their creation of an Israeli sovereign state. That's why there's an Israel today. They celebrated their anniversary in 1948. The Palestinians could have done the same thing. They could have said to the UN, fantastic, we have our own homeland, we have our own state, let's set up a government, let's have an Independence Day, let's have parades, and let's enjoy life with our neighbors, the Israelis. Instead, the 5 surrounding Muslim nations all went to war against Israel day one, the very day that Israel declared their independence. They were attacked by an army of 5 Muslim nations. And that warfare has been taking place without ceasing since 1948. The Muslims have never, ever, not a single time, shown any interest in a two-state solution. Don't forget that Jordan, after the war in 1948, Jordan controlled what we know today as the West Bank for 20 years. From 1948 to 1967, the Muslims controlled the West Bank. Jordan controlled the West Bank. They took control of it in that 1948 war. Now, Israel took back control of it in 1967, and that's why they rightfully, ethically, morally, legally, by international law and every other way, control that land today. They have every right to sovereign control over the West Bank. They took it fair and square in the 1967 war. That's what happens. You go to war and you lose. That's one of the consequences, my friend. You lose sovereign control of territory. You didn't want to take that risk. You shouldn't have gone to war in the first place. So at any rate, Jordan and the Muslims had control of the West Bank from 1948 to 1967. They could have created a Palestinian state on the West Bank. Could be there today. They could have their own capital city. They could have their own assembly. They could have their own industrial facilities. The Muslims were not interested. They were not interested in a state for the Palestinians. They wanted to keep them in these squalid refugee camps so they could blame their conditions on the Israelis, even though the Israelis had nothing to do with it. So the fact that you've had these Palestinians living in these squalid, infested, rat hole refugee camps since 1948 is the fault of the Muslims, deliberate on their part. They want to keep these Palestinians oppressed. They want to keep them in these squalid refugee camps so they can use them to score political points in the eyes of the world against Israel. So for 19 years, they had total control of the West Bank. There could have been a flourishing Palestinian state right there. They chose not to do it. They never have. And that's why there is no Palestinian state. So Barack Obama, President Obama, it's fine for you to say that they ought to have their own state. That's fine. Whose fault is that? It is their own fault. Israel cannot be blamed one single last little bit for the fact that the Palestinians do not have a homeland. Here is the second clip from Barack Obama, clip 2, where he draws a parallel between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and you won't believe the parallel he draws. Let's listen.
But my argument is, even though both sides may have areas of strong disagreement, may be engaging in activities that the other side considers to be a breach of good faith, we have to push through those things to try to get to an agreement, because if we get an agreement, then it will be very clear what the nature of that agreement is. There will be a sovereign Palestinian state, a sovereign Jewish state of Israel, and those two states, I think, will be able to deal with each other the same way all states do. I mean, you know, the United States and Canada has arguments once in a while, but they're not the nature of arguments that can't be solved diplomatically.
Barack Obama, that's because Canada is not trying to bomb us back to the Stone Age. I mean, that's an absurd parallel. Do you think if missiles were raining down every day of the week into schoolyards and backyards, and those missiles were being fired from Canadian soil into America, do you think we would put up with that? Well, I mean, maybe Barack Obama would. Ronald Reagan wouldn't put up with that. George W. Bush wouldn't put up with that for 30 minutes. We would take care of that situation. That's the parallel. So it's a completely bogus parallel. Now, the way the scales are tilted toward Israel, let's play clip number 17. This is Erin Burnett. This actually goes back a week or two. She's talking with Laura Bush. But imagine if she were to say, you'll hear what she says here, the parallel would be, try to picture her saying that we might just have to be, in order to get something done, we may just have to be prepared to accept a little Islamophobia. Maybe we don't like Islamophobia, but, you know, I think maybe to get something done here, we just have to be prepared to accept a certain amount of Islamophobia. There would be absolute outrage, but when it comes to anti-Semitism, it's a different story. Let's listen.
An Egyptian woman, her name's Samira Ibrahim, and she's done a lot of things, courageous things. She's also been criticized for sending tweets that are anti-Semitic, anti-American. Does the U.S. need to accept that when we want to make change, you have to support people that do those things financially, in terms of awards, in terms of all these things, because it pays off in the end? Is that a trade-off we have to make?
Can you imagine that? Can you imagine her asking her about Terry Jones? Now, Terry Jones, yeah, he burned a Quran and he inflamed the entire Muslim world, but doesn't the U.S. need to accept then when we want to make change, you have to support people that do those things because it pays off in the end? I mean, it's just kind of absurd. So, in other words, as far as CNN's concerned and the mainstream media, just a little bit of anti-Semitism, absolutely just fine, may have to put up with it. A little different when we're talking about Islamophobia. All right, let's go to the phones. Let's go to Bill in Billington, West Virginia. Bill, welcome. What's on your mind?
Hi, Brian. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I just want to make a comment on yesterday's segment when you talked about the young fellow that was put in prison and took on the Muslim religion after being caught and put in prison.
Oh, yeah, the guy that shot up the theater in Aurora, yeah.
Right. Well, let's go back to the 70s when we had a prize fighter named Cassius Clay. And when he was inducted into our army, showed his true cowardness and took on the Muslim religion and said he didn't believe in those kind of things.
Yeah, said, I ain't got nothing against them Viet Cong.
Yeah, we've turned around and let that happen to ourselves. The sad thing is, people my age know that. I don't know if you remember that or not. But I remember right after 9/11, I walked into a Walmart store. They had a big book display that 2 days after 9/11, America's Heroes. Right dead center was Muhammad Ali. I went and got the store manager, brought him out, and I said, do you know who that man really is? He, to me, is an American coward. Because he would not serve in this military, he took on the Muslim religion to get out of serving in the Army. He was even inducted into the Army. If any of us had done that, we'd be in prison right now.
You know, it's interesting. You think about it. I hadn't thought about that parallel with Muhammad Ali, but it was all part and parcel of his refusal to go to Vietnam. And it was like what Muhammad Ali was saying is that it was up to him to decide who America's enemies are. And if in his judgment somebody wasn't an enemy of the United States, then he didn't have any moral obligation to go to defend this country. He wasn't going to defend this country unless it was against somebody that he thought was an enemy of the United States. And remember, this is exactly what happened with the guy that shot up Fort Hood, Major Nadal Malik Hassan. It's the same exact deal where he said, look, I can't go over to Afghanistan and shoot my fellow Muslims because I'm a Muslim first. I am an American second. I am a Muslim first. I cannot go over there in the interest of the United States of America defending her sovereignty and her freedom and her liberty. I cannot go over there and train deadly fire on Muslims. That would be against my religion to do that, even though I've taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So he was doing basically the same thing. He would say, look, I get to decide who America's enemies are and whether I have to go fight them. And if I decide that that's not an enemy that I ought to be fighting, I feel complete liberty to take out 13 of my fellow soldiers.
And those are the mistakes that we have been making for years, over and over and over again. We have to get back to what this country was founded on. For instance, you were talking before about our legislative people and the way they, and then our judicial system, how they actually take our laws and are changing the laws to come up with whatever they want to bring in gay marriage and say it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Now, the way I understand it, the judicial people are there to administer and to interpret the laws that are already on the books, not to make laws. Okay. Therefore, and I would wonder too that if we went back to some of these here people we put in office who back homosexual marriage and gay marriages and all homosexuals, if we went back and told them, maybe you better go read Romans, specifically Romans 1:32. I believe that tells me that if you don't even have to be homosexual, but if you condone it, you're as guilty as they are.
Yeah. All right, Bill, listen, I appreciate that. And, you know, it'd be an indication of just how far we have drifted from our moorings, because the Founding Fathers had enormous respect for the moral content of the Bible. They built a lot of our Constitution, our jurisprudence, and our frame of government squarely on the foundation of the Bible. If you tried to recommend they go back and read it today, wouldn't get anywhere. Back in 2.